A helicopter is flying high over the Catskill Mountains in New York. Suddenly, someone falls from the helicopter and crashes into the tree-covered slopes. The body of a man is found lying dead among the trees. Fast forward 2 years, 7 months, and 19 days after the events in Margrave, Reacher is in Murfreesboro, Arkansas, buying new clothes at a thrift store. When he realizes he doesn't have enough money, he heads to an ATM across the street. While there, he notices a woman withdrawing cash, battered and bloodied, and sees a car parked nearby. Reacher quickly figures out she's being carjacked, and her son is being held hostage by an armed thief. He walks over, knocks the thief out cold, saves the woman's son, and tells her to call the cops. After withdrawing cash, Reacher notices 2 deposits in his account, a coded message. The first deposit is $1.10, and the second is $1,030, which together point to the 110th Special Investigations Unit and its standard distress call, 1030. Reacher borrows the store's phone and contacts Frances Neagley, who tells him that Calvin Franz's body has been found in the Catskill Mountains, apparently thrown from a plane. She asks him to come to New York and assures him the deposit will cover his airfare. A few years earlier, in Rock Creek, Virginia, Reacher is assembling the U.S. Army 110th MP Special Investigations Unit. The team is made up of people with special skills but little experience as MPs. At first, they don't get along or work well together. When Franz asks Reacher if he thinks the team will function, Reacher doesn't have an answer, but treats them all to beers at a local pub. In the present, in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Reacher finds Neagley at a cafe. She tells him Franz disappeared a week ago, and his murder has been under investigation by the NYPD. She learned of his death from his widow, Angela Franz. Reacher is shocked to find out Franz was married with a family. After looking at photos from the crime scene, Reacher figures out Franz was tortured, his legs broken with an iron bar, and then thrown from a helicopter. Some college students found his body later. Before he died, Franz left several voice messages for Neagley, asking her to return his call because he needed her help on a case. Neagley couldn't get back to him due to her heavy workload and regrets not answering sooner. Reacher assumes Franz was trying to get the unit's help, but Neagley couldn't reach O'Donnell, Dixon, Orozco, or Sanchez, and Lowry had been killed in a car accident 2 years ago. Swan's contact information is nowhere to be found. Reacher is shocked to hear about Lowry's death and Franz's family. They decide to investigate Franz's case themselves, not leaving it to the NYPD, and head to visit his widow. As they leave the diner, 2 people are watching them. At Franz's house, Reacher and Neagley meet Angela, Franz's widow, who's devastated by the news of his death, and her son, Mikey. When Reacher asks about the timeline leading up to Franz's death, Angela tearfully explains that the NYPD told her Franz was either missing due to a case or partying with the wrong people, but she didn't believe it. It didn't match his usual behavior. When Angela returned home, she found their house ransacked, but nothing valuable was taken, and the burglar's identity remained a mystery. She gives them the key to Franz's workplace, where it had also been trashed, but the police didn't find anything useful. Mikey chants the unit's old mantra, and Neagley, deeply moved, tells him about their shared history. As they leave, Reacher notices a black sedan has been tailing them since they left the diner. Meanwhile, a man with a scarred face pays off the concierge and learns that Neagley and Reacher checked into the hotel under fake names. He contacts Shane Langston, who tells him to keep an eye on them. At Franz's office, Reacher and Neagley find it in disarray. They conclude that whoever trashed the place was looking for something small. Neagley finds a picture frame with a photo of their old 110th unit. As she looks outside, she notices a post office across the street. Using the key Angela gave them, they realize there's another key that could open a post office box. They head to the post office but find it closed and decide to return in the morning. Back at the hotel, Neagley talks about her professional life, while Reacher shares stories about his nomadic lifestyle. They both open up about their past relationship with their former teammate Dixon, though Reacher denies anything unprofessional ever happened. Back in Rock Creek, the team hangs out at an officers' club, where one man threatens to kick Neagley out since it's for officers only. Reacher tries to settle it peacefully, but the man insults Neagley, sparking a fight between the team and the club patrons. Afterward, the team celebrates around a campfire. Reacher and Neagley solidify their friendship, while Franz realizes Reacher had been testing the team dynamic at the bar. Reacher admits he knew the patrons would be sticklers for rules and the club would be crowded, making it the perfect opportunity for a test. The team commemorates their first night with a photo. Afterward, Reacher is haunted by Franz's body, who asks if he'll do anything about his murder. Reacher wakes up, terrified. The next morning, a man using the name Adrian Mount clears customs at LAX and burns his passport in the restroom. Meanwhile, at the post office, Neagley learns from Angela that she doesn't know which mailbox belonged to Franz. The workers refuse to give her any information since it was registered under Franz's company name. Neagley argues that they could be arrested for federal mail tampering if they try every box. Reacher comes up with a plan. Neagley will distract the workers while he searches for the box Franz would have used based on his traits. As Reacher goes through each box, an elderly woman catches him, but he manages to find the right one just as the workers almost catch him. Inside the box, they find bills, solicitations, and a USB drive. Neagley discovers her laptop doesn't have a port that matches the USB drive, so Reacher asks to borrow her car to look for a gun. In a church, Reacher asks a priest for the location of a drug peddler under the cover story of Looking for His Cousin. The priest directs him to Dumont, east of Rockaway, where everyone in his outreach program gets their drugs. Reacher arrives, beats up 2 local dealers, steals their money and a gun, and returns to the church to donate to the priest's outreach program. Elsewhere in LA, AM meets with 2 passport forgers and collects his fake passports before slitting one of their throats and stabbing the other in the abdomen. Meanwhile, Reacher and Neagley return to their hotel, only to find their rooms have been ransacked. As they search the room, they ambush another person hiding inside, only to discover it's O'Donnell, who had arrived earlier and found the room in the same state. O'Donnell explains that he'd been in the woods with his family, off the grid. When they returned home, he found the urgent message left by Neagley. He expresses his condolences over Franz's death and vows to track down the culprits. Soon after, Neagley plugs in the USB drive, but it's password protected, with only 3 guesses and 2 minutes before the data is wiped. The team scrambles, trying to figure out what password Franz might have used. After going through Franz's character, O'Donnell suggests that Franz respected Reacher the most. Neagley enters the password Reacher, and it works, leaving Reacher emotional. At LAX, AM is now going by the alias Andrew McBride. He strikes up a conversation with a young boy interested in his comic book, explaining that he loves comics because the good guys always win. He's then informed by the ticket agent that his booking to Denver, Colorado has been completed. Back at the hotel, Neagley prints out a list of names with the initials AM, and Reacher theorizes these are aliases, carefully chosen so the person would never need to change their signature. They also print out 7 pages containing a random series of numbers, with no clear order or explanation. The trio then heads to Queens to check on Swan. At his apartment, they find his dog, Maisie, dead from dehydration. Reacher deduces that Swan has been dead for some time, as he would never let Maisie suffer. Convinced someone is targeting their group, Reacher becomes even more determined to find their pursuers and stop them from eliminating his team. As they exit Swan's residence, Reacher notices the black sedan from earlier tailing them again. He confronts the driver, knocking him out cold. Neagley checks the driver's ID and discovers he's NYPD detective Guy Russo. Realizing the connection, the team flees, but O'Donnell criticizes Reacher for his recklessness, pointing out that now he'll be a wanted man. Neagley recognizes Russo as one of the officers handling Franz's murder case. Reacher theorizes that the NYPD became aware of Franz's call to Neagley and her purchase of the plane ticket, though the exact reason remains unclear. O'Donnell attempts to contact Jorge Sanchez and Manuel Orozco, but finds their voicemail full. With little luck, Reacher suggests heading to Atlantic City to search for Sanchez and Orozco. Meanwhile, the scarred man calls Shane Langston to update him on the situation and requests backup. Langston orders him to continue tailing the group. At the airport parking lot, Neagley and O'Donnell argue about where to get a new vehicle, but Reacher spots Carla Dixon, a member of their old unit. Dixon had been deep undercover in Texas for a corporate embezzlement case and hadn't gotten the message until now. Reacher fills her in on the situation and asks her to rent a car using her fake ID. Dixon agrees and joins them in the investigation. Back in their military days, Dixon had brought Reacher's attention to an aviation fuel theft case in Afghanistan. Dixon suggested that the stolen fuel wasn't just for profit, but rather for C-17s ferrying Humvees back to the U.S. Dixon had also noticed there were no black market fuel deals around the area, which led her to suspect the plane was intentionally overfueled. However, the amount of fuel when the plane landed was as expected. Reacher realized the excess weight wasn't fuel, but heavy contraband hidden inside the Humvees. Reacher decided to investigate further, though Dixon's suggestion for him to buy her a beer to celebrate was met with rejection. In the present, Dixon examines the series of random numbers left by Franz, but can't make sense of them. She points out that the 1st, 4th, 6th, and 7th pages contain 26 numbers, while the 5th has 27. O'Donnell suggests James Barr might be behind the murders, but Reacher quickly disproves this, recalling Barr owed him a favor when they crossed paths in Indiana. As they continue down the road, The scarred man determines that Dixon's alias was used to rent the vehicle and informs Langston, who is pleased to hear they are all in one place. Langston orders his man to take them out by the next day. In Atlantic City, the team arrives at Sanchez and Orozco's workplace, only to find it in a similar state to all the other properties linked to their unit, except Swan's. While searching, O'Donnell finds the photo from their first night together. Reacher realizes he's the only member without one. He comes across a framed photo of Sanchez and a woman at the bar and decides this is their next lead. They head to Lucky's Lounge, where Reacher and Neagley question the woman's whereabouts while Dixon and O'Donnell stay outside. The pair are led into the office by two patrons. While Milena, the woman in the photo, is warned by the bartender to escape, Dixon and O'Donnell give chase while Reacher and Neagley fight off the staff's ambush attempt. Dixon manages to catch Milena, who apologizes for running, explaining she recognized their faces from Sanchez's old photos. She assures them the staff was just looking out for her safety. Milena tells them that a scarred man, claiming to work with Sanchez and Orozco, asked her a week ago if Sanchez had left a digital storage device with her. Sensing something was wrong, Milena called Sanchez, but he didn't answer. She suspects something went wrong. O'Donnell asks Milena about Orozco's connection to Franz and Swan. Milena confirms they were working on a case together and had visited the bar a couple of weeks ago, mentioning Swan's name but not the operation. Milena is shocked to hear about Franz's death, which leads her to wonder if Sanchez and Orozco are dead too. Neagley reassures her that it's unconfirmed. Milena recalls Sanchez's last encounter, where he received a call with the phrase $650 at $100K each, which worried him enough to leave the bar in a hurry. Believing the amount of money involved might have been stolen from a casino, the team heads to Neptune Casino. They theorize that Sanchez and Orozco had worked as freelance security and stumbled upon something big, possibly reaching out to Franz for help. When a waitress named Ellie asks for their order, Reacher instead asks to speak with the director of security. They meet David Wright, who recognizes them from Sanchez and Orozco's stories. Wright is shocked to hear about their potential deaths. Dixon asks him to analyze the numbers, but he can't make sense of them either. Reacher informs Wright about a possible gambling scam, but Wright insists all the casino's money is accounted for. He offers to speak with the competitors to see if they know anything related to the case and allows the team to stay in a suite for the night while he processes their request. In the suite, the team starts opening up about their personal lives. Dixon talks about how her engagement ended after she thought her fiancé was cheating, but it turned out he was just texting his niece. At first, she was upset, but later she felt relieved because she realized she didn't want a relationship that was stable but boring. The breakup led her to take on a deep undercover mission. Neagley shares that she's been working to save money for her dad's nursing care. Reacher, however, talks about how he enjoys his nomadic lifestyle and sees the regular world as a cage. He likes the freedom and avoids getting tied down. When Dixon asks if he ever feels lonely, he doesn't answer, keeping his emotions to himself. Later that night, Reacher sneaks out to analyze the numbers Franz left behind. While walking through the casino, he sees Dixon at a blackjack table, winning easily with her skills. She's accused of counting cards and politely asked to leave. The scarred man sitting nearby notices everything. Dixon and Reacher go for a late-night walk, and she talks about her dream of exposing government corruption, especially how they waste taxpayer money. She wants to start a non-profit to help people who really need it. As they talk, she wonders why their relationship never happened back in the military. Reacher says it wasn't professional, and they both agree it never felt like the right time. They notice two men following them. Reacher spots their car and suggests they lead them to a construction site. A fight breaks out. Reacher takes one down with a trowel, while Dixon uses the other man as a shield to stop the second. Reacher tracks down the scarred man and drowns him in cement before they bury the bodies. They don't find any IDs on the men, but discover a burner phone with Langston's number. Reacher calls Langston, who warns them things won't end well but seems nervous before hanging up. In the car, they find profiles of themselves and a New Age Technologies parking pass from the day before. Reacher realizes they're up against some serious professionals. The two head back to the hotel and treat each other's injuries from the fight. They end up sleeping together, and their connection deepens. The next morning, outside Denver, AM meets a man who tells him that 650 weapons are being transported on a truck, and they can track it with a GPS. The man gives him a map with two possible ambush points. AM reassures him that the weapons are for overseas use and the driver won't be harmed. Back in Atlantic City, Reacher and Dixon update the team. Wright visits and tells them that Sanchez and Orozco's bodies were found in the Catskill Mountains. They have injuries similar to Franz's, and they've been there for a while. Wright also says that no one used the AM aliases to check into hotels in the area. Orozco and Sanchez weren't working for any competitors either. The team looks into the gambling scam, but the competitors already did their audits and the losses were within acceptable limits. Dixon puts the pieces together and thinks the case is tied to New York. Reacher, still angry about his former teammates' deaths, decides they need more weapons to deal with what's coming next. In New Age, Calvin Franz is enduring severe torture at the hands of Shane Langston's men, trying to get him to spill information. Despite having both legs broken and being brutally beaten, Franz holds on and defiantly spits blood in Langston's face. Furious, Langston orders his men to take Franz to a helicopter. High above the Catskill Mountains, Langston gives Franz one last chance to reveal what they want, but Franz wonders what the big guy will do to him. Langston, annoyed, gives the order to dump him out of the helicopter. As the doors close, Langston is left wondering who the big guy really is. In the present, Reacher is at a gun shop, bribing the owner, Frank Majeski, into selling him weapons without waiting for official paperwork. On their drive back to New York, Reacher and Dixon joke about O'Donnell's poor shooting skills. Neagley uncovers a motel called Jade East in Belt Parkway, which could serve as a hideout. As they banter, they don't realize they're being followed by a police cruiser. The officer signals them to pull over. Reacher asks Dixon to stop, and after a moment, Russo arrives and arrests Reacher. Once identified, Reacher asks O'Donnell to act as his lawyer since he has some legal experience from Rutgers. He also tasks Neagley and Dixon with investigating New Age. O'Donnell accompanies Reacher to the station with Russo. During the drive, Russo reveals that he tracked them by getting security footage from the car rental companies at the airport, recognizing them when they rented a car. He kept tabs on them, tracking the plate and making sure it came back to New York when the cruiser spotted them. While in the back seat, Reacher and O'Donnell discover a bag full of kids' toys, which annoys Reacher. At New Age, Dixon and Neagley meet with the director of operations, Marlo Burns, to dig into the parking pass they found. They tell her about the current case and get her cooperation by mentioning the victims were close to them. Marlo eventually reveals the parking pass belongs to Trevor Seropian, who had been chasing after them and was killed by Reacher. Seropian had come in for an interview offering maintenance services, but was rejected since their operation was too small. Marlo gives them Seropian's address, since the company still has his resume on file. Back at the station, Reacher realizes he was arrested only because they wanted information related to his case, since his arrest hasn't been processed. Russo starts to see that their investigation is interfering with his. Reluctantly, they agree to exchange information, driven by a shared desire to solve the case. Russo reveals that Franz's phone logs show multiple calls to O'Donnell, Sanchez, Swan, and Orozco, but none to Reacher, who doesn't carry a phone. Reacher, sensing an opportunity, proposes a deal where they share information. They mention the phrase 650 at 100K, which they believe means $65 million, but they still can't figure out how it's connected or what the money is for. When Russo suggests that Reacher's friends were criminals involved in this, Reacher gets angry, accusing Russo of being a dirty cop. He points out how Russo had tailed them without properly identifying himself and gathered information without making a formal arrest, which kept things off the books. Russo denies being corrupt, but the tension calms down when O'Donnell steps in, asking for everyone to keep the integrity and share what they know. Russo then announces they found a suspect from a memory card left inside a printer at Franz's office. The print reveals a man named Azari Mahmoud, known to Interpol as a weapons broker for terrorist organizations. Sanchez's notes indicate he's a person of interest. Reacher realizes that Sanchez and Orozco had been digging into this for Franz's case. Noticing Mahmoud's name has the initials AM, Reacher writes down the list of suspects and tells Russo to have DHS flag all of his aliases. As the gravity of the case sets in, Reacher and O'Donnell realize it's far bigger than they initially thought. Back in their military days, Tony Swan, Reacher, Dixon, and O'Donnell are at a crime scene outside an officers' club where a man, Private Sims, was shot in the back. O'Donnell thinks it's just a bar fight gone wrong, but Swan insists Sims wasn't involved in any fight. Reacher figures out that Sims was likely running for his life, judging by the muddy rainwater stains on his pant cuffs and the fact he tripped in a pothole. Reacher also notices smudged ink on Sims's palm that looks like a kite, which could be tied to drug activity. When Lieutenant Colonel Hortense Fields shows up to check on the case, Reacher realizes the kite design is like the ones used in Afghanistan, a region known for heroin production. He connects the dots between this case and one involving aviation fuel, so he asks Dixon to dig into it again, thinking he knows what was being transported on the plane. Back in the present, Neagley and Dixon are looking over some numbers. Neagley figures out the numbers represent days and months, with each page corresponding to a month, and the numbers 26 and 27 indicating someone working 6 days a week. Dixon notices the records cover the last 7 months, and the numbers show things went from decent to pretty bad by month 7. They start wondering what exactly these numbers are tracking. Later on, Russo comes back to tell Reacher and O'Donnell that they have a lead on someone who booked a ticket from Denver to JFK. Meanwhile, AM realizes some people are looking for him. To test his theory, AM bumps into a cop and notices the suitcase is empty, confirming his suspicion. He burns his ID, calls Langston to explain the delay, and reassures him that even though it's Langston's first time, AM has done this plenty of times. Langston asks how AM plans to get a new ID, and as they pass by an ad for a cosmetic surgeon, AM comes up with a plan. After that, Reacher and O'Donnell are released and meet up with Dixon and Neagley at the motel. Reacher asks about Seropian's neighbor, Barbara Gottelsman, and calls her to confirm if Seropian still lives there. She says he does, and the team moves in. Neagley picks the lock, and Reacher throws a pipe bomb to clear out some people inside. They eliminate everyone, and Reacher spots a car watching them. When the driver realizes he's been seen, he takes off, and Neagley goes up to the roof to help Reacher track the car. After chasing it down, Reacher throws a barbecue stand at the window, causing the car to crash. They pull the driver, Brian Collins, out and try to interrogate him, but he dies from a heart attack before they can get anything out of him. Reacher tries to save him, but it's too late. He goes back to Seropian's place to tell the team he couldn't get any information. They leave shortly after. Back at the motel, Russo confronts the team, upset about their reckless actions. Reacher knows they've been set up because it's unlikely an assassin would leave his real address. He points out two possibilities. Seropian either used a fake address or was working for New Age as a hitman, with the real address being a trap. Russo warns them that their partnership will only work if they stop being reckless, especially since he had to lie when taking Gottelsman's statement. He also tells them the trap failed, meaning the list of aliases and names with the initials AM is useless now because the man knows he's being watched. Russo says he'll get a warrant to search New Age, but they need to stay put until he hears from them. Reacher gives him their burner number and ignores Russo's warning not to do anything reckless. Reacher and the team decide to storm New Age HQ with their car, telling everyone to grab anything valuable in the HR, server room, and Director of Operations office. They loot everything they can find. While they're at it, Reacher finds a photo of some employees and collects it. When the team burns their disguises, they're shocked to see that Swan is one of the people in the photo. The team is going through all the information when O'Donnell suggests Swan might have been involved in tracking them down. Reacher immediately rejects this, saying he trusts Swan from their time together in the military. However, O'Donnell finds out that Swan was working for New Age as Assistant Director of Security, under Shane Langston, the Director of Security. They also learn that Brian Collins, the driver, was an Associate Security Officer. Meanwhile, Neagley suspects that Marlo Burns knew she was sending them into a trap. O'Donnell is frustrated about having to check out all the employees because they could have played a role in setting them up. Meanwhile, in New York, Russo is being chewed out by his boss, Lieutenant Drew Marsh, for the break-in at New Age. Marsh is mad because the break-in set their investigation back. He blames Russo for not keeping an eye on the 110th unit and letting them rob the company. Russo defends himself, saying he warned them not to do anything reckless. Marsh orders him to find out what the unit has discovered. By morning, Reacher complains about the music playing in the diner. Neagley finds that Swan had emails addressed to Marlo, but never shared them with Langston or anyone in security. In one of the emails, Swan writes a cryptic message about the sixth song on Jimi Hendrix's Axis, Bold as Love, which O'Donnell notices right away. Swan hated Hendrix's music, so the message feels off. Dixon figures out that the sixth track is called Little Wing. Reacher recalls a document about a major defense project that New Age had worked on. It was a military project, but the details are vague. Senator Malcolm Lavoie tried to push for congressional approval because he believed in the project, and O'Donnell points out that Lavoie has a history of shady dealings. Dixon sums it up. Swan coded a message to Marlo about a program supported by a corrupt politician, and they need to interrogate Lavoie. Neagley disagrees, saying Lavoie is surrounded by high-level security. O'Donnell suggests questioning Lavoie's legislative director instead, since they would have more information about the laws being passed and aren't surrounded by heavy security. O'Donnell says he has info on high-level people and can get Lavoie's legislative director's details. Reacher agrees, and O'Donnell steps outside to make some calls. While he's gone, Neagley wonders if Swan was a traitor since his body was never found, and his home wasn't looted like the others. Reacher insists he would never let his dog die. Dixon wonders if Swan might have taken bribes because of financial problems, and Neagley reminds them that there are things they don't know about some people. The team recalls a time from their military days when they busted a drug ring and seized 48 bags of heroin. They celebrate, but Lowry reminds them there's still work to do. Neagley notices that the heroin is 99% pure. Lieutenant Fields congratulates them on their success, but after she leaves, Swan expresses his disgust for drug traffickers, who make more money than all their pensions combined. Dixon realizes that one bag is missing. Lowry says he counted all the bags when they loaded them into Swan's vehicle. Reacher, Neagley, and Swan check the vehicle and find the missing bag, which Reacher believes fell out of the back during the drive. Reacher buys Swan's explanation, but Neagley is doubtful and decides not to mention it to Reacher. In the present, they reflect on the drug bust, with Neagley suggesting that Swan was caught red-handed, and he missed his chance to make money. Reacher, however, still believes Swan was a good man. Neagley hints that Reacher might be trying to prove Swan's innocence because he doesn't want to feel guilty for their friends' deaths or doubt his own judgment. The team heads off to see what O'Donnell has found. In Denver, Colorado, AM meets Dr. Manuel Elzogby, a cosmetic surgeon, and asks about getting a new face. When Dr. Elzogby confirms the request, AM stabs him in the throat. The doctor tries to call for help but can't. AM takes his identity and credentials before killing his female secretary the same way. AM cancels all appointments for the day and leaves. Meanwhile, at the motel, O'Donnell learns that Lavoie's legislative director is Daniel Boyd. Boyd comes from a rich family, and 2 of his past criminal charges mysteriously disappeared during his college years. O'Donnell finds out Boyd will be at a fundraiser in Boston. Reacher finally answers multiple calls from Russo, who is angry about the break-in. Reacher sarcastically pretends he has no idea what Russo's talking about. Russo demands to know what information they've gathered. Reacher sends him details about New Age's security team roster and asks Russo to run background checks. Much to Russo's frustration, Reacher tells him they're heading to Boston. Before they leave, Neagley and Dixon suggest questioning Marlowe at her house, but Reacher and O'Donnell decide to get weapons from some drug dealers instead. When Neagley and Dixon arrive at Marlowe's house, they find that she and her daughter, Jane, have packed up and escaped through the back door. Dixon finds bags of cash left behind in the closet, which surprises them both. In Colorado, AM rents a car using Elzogby's identity. He talks to a kid nearby, offering him the same explanation he used before. In Boston, the team reunites at a clothing store to dress up for the fundraiser. O'Donnell is confused about where Reacher's casual clothes went, and Reacher bluntly says they're in the trash because he didn't want to carry luggage. O'Donnell jokingly calls him sociopathic for not keeping anything extra. O'Donnell asks about Marlowe's whereabouts, but Reacher isn't sure what's going on with her. O'Donnell teases that Marlowe could be Reacher's soulmate since she only packed her toothbrush, but Reacher laughs it off. Neagley, disgusted with her formal outfit, Reacher offers to pay Neagley back for her dress in 2 months with his pension money, and she agrees. Dixon steps out in her evening gown, and Reacher is clearly flustered by her appearance, which Dixon notices. At the opera, Dixon pretends to be a lost patron and lures Boyd, who offers to swap her tickets for a better seat with his aide. Neagley is watching and confirms Boyd has taken the bait. Outside, Reacher and O'Donnell wait at a nearby diner while analyzing some numbers. When a waitress casually mentions tallying their check, Reacher realizes it's a set of fractions adding up to 2,197, with only 1,547 successful attempts counted. When they account for failures, the number drops to 650, matching the phrase 650 at 100K each. During his investigation, O'Donnell gets a call from one of his children, where he advises them to only use their hands for helping, not hitting. Reacher sarcastically remarks that O'Donnell must have brass knuckles in his pocket. O'Donnell says domestic life has changed him since his military days, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. He suggests that life with Dixon could be good for Reacher, but Reacher says he'd rather settle down with 4 or 5 dogs, considering Dixon a close friend. Neagley announces the intermission is over, and Dixon and Boyd are leaving. Reacher's guy is in position. In an alley, Boyd tries to do drugs with Dixon, but Lieutenant Oscar Finley catches him in the act. In the interrogation room, Finley questions Boyd about the drugs. Boyd tries to intimidate him with his family's influence and his position, but Finley is unfazed and tells Boyd the woman in the car isn't his wife. He also knows Boyd is working for Lavoie. Finley gives Boyd a cover story about the FBI, and then Reacher and O'Donnell enter, pretending to be Jack Margrave and Blake due to their past connection with Finley. Boyd demands his lawyer, but Reacher and O'Donnell threaten to leak his infidelity and drug use unless he gives them information about Little Wing. Boyd hesitates, but eventually gives in after O'Donnell threatens to call his wife. He reveals that Little Wing is a code name for software that allows missiles to defeat all countermeasures. It was originally created to protect commercial aircraft, but was tweaked by New Age. The software lets ground-fired missiles bypass the main target initially, making the pilot think they're safe until the missile reacquires the target. Boyd says Lavoie is interested in the technology because it would advance their military. Boyd explains that Lavoie is pushing for congressional approval and is burying the proposal in paperwork. Boyd assures them that New Age has full control of the technology. He also reveals New Age has 2 facilities, one in New York for the software and one in Denver for the hardware. Reacher and O'Donnell leave the room, leaving Boyd confused about whether the drug charges will be dropped. Reacher tells him he's not a cop. Outside, Reacher and Finley catch up. Finley offers his help, but Reacher declines, not wanting to drag him further into the case. Finley also reunites with Neagley and compliments her outfit, which makes her embarrassed, and she tells him to mind his own business. The trio parts ways amicably. In the car, Reacher tells Dixon and Neagley to head to the Colorado facility to sabotage the hardware, while he and O'Donnell go to Homeland Security in D.C. to learn more about AM through Reacher's brother's contacts. When O'Donnell asks about Joe, Reacher bluntly says he's dead, which shocks them both. The unit stops at a diner along the way. In the parking lot, a biker gang confronts them, confiscates their weapons, and plans to kill them. The unit fights back, maiming and killing most of the gang members before recovering their weapons. Reacher grabs the leader's phone and contacts Langston, letting him know his attempt on their lives failed. Reacher visits O'Donnell's family, meeting his wife Lily and their 2 young sons, Danny and Davey. O'Donnell tells Lily to take the kids to Asheville for safety while they handle the case, advising no contact. Though Lily is concerned, she trusts her husband's judgment. Reacher is surprised by how calm she remains, but O'Donnell explains that Lily grew up in a family used to high-pressure situations, with her mother being an ER nurse and her father a Chicago fire chief. Reacher jokingly remarks that he thought O'Donnell would end up dying from gonorrhea with all the girls fighting over his money. O'Donnell responds that he didn't want every girl, just the right one. Soon after, O'Donnell receives a message from Neagley and Dixon, who are at a warehouse in Denver. In Denver, Neagley and Dixon pretend to be representatives from the Defense Contract Management Agency, DCMA, to inspect missile shipments. While waiting to speak with the foreman, Dixon learns that Neagley didn't have a typical childhood, as she spent much of it studying or taking care of her father and working whenever she had time. When they meet with the foreman, they ask about the specifications of the missiles, their manufacturing process, and delivery schedules. The foreman informs them that all 650 missiles had already been shipped 10 minutes ago, and hands over the shipment papers. Realizing they're too late, Neagley and Dixon leave quickly. On their way, the driver in charge of the shipment stops to help a group of men with a broken-down truck. One of the men, Oleg, shoots him in the chest. They dispose of the body and steal the missiles. Oleg calls AM to inform him of the situation, telling him the driver's death helped them track the shipment. AM reassures Oleg that New Age doesn't care about the driver's death as long as they get paid, and tells him to switch trailers and move on. Oleg promises to meet him in New York. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., O'Donnell and Reacher visit Homeland Security and use Joe Reacher's connections to meet with DHS agents Omar Karim and Hernandez. The agents tell them AM is a ghost, only leaving behind 3 short recordings of his voice. Based on what they know, AM seems to be a broker for experimental or advanced weapons, working for the highest bidder. His first known involvement was 6 years ago in Luxembourg, helping terrorists acquire experimental nerve gas. However, DHS intercepted the trade and arrested everyone, except for AM. Reacher and O'Donnell realized the deal involved bearer bonds, which are used for money laundering and tax evasion, a method that AM would likely use to transport large sums of money discreetly. They figure that AM will make the payment in person during the transaction, which would be their chance to catch him. The agents promise to pursue AM and those working with him, but Reacher warns them that if his unit gets to them first, they'll all be killed, leaving the agents stunned and remarking that his demeanor is just like Joe's. Back in Colorado, the men continue to swap trailers and license plates. Neagley and Dixon recognize the men as hijackers and open fire. Dixon realizes that the foreman must have tipped off New Age about the government inspectors. Langston, now aware of their identities, orders a hit. Oleg manages to drive away with the truck, but they're pinned down by the others. After a brief shootout, Neagley and Dixon manage to ambush and kill the remaining hijackers. After the fight, Dixon calls in the scene anonymously and asks Neagley to get the shipment manifest to track the license plate number. Neagley notices something that shocks her. After burning the car to remove prints and DNA, they call Reacher and O'Donnell to inform them that the missiles were hijacked. They also reveal that Swan personally authorized the shipment to New York just before it left. Reacher suspects that Swan was either forced or his signature was forged, but they confirm that it was his digital fingerprint. Dixon adds that New Age's New York HQ has tight biometric security, making it unlikely Swan was coerced without creating a scene. This raises suspicions about Swan's involvement. After hanging up, O'Donnell asks Reacher if he's willing to kill Swan, but Reacher simply says he needs to take a walk. Back in their military days, Reacher, Swan, and their unit tried to bust drug dealers. Orozco, Neagley, Franz, and Sanchez waited in a van while Reacher and Swan posed as dealers. One of the guys tested the purity of heroin, and once it checked out, they agreed on a deal. The team in the van reminded each other that once everything was settled, they'd bust the deal dealers and interrogate them to find their main supplier. But things went wrong when a delivery boy showed up with food. While Reacher argued over the price, the boy recognized Swan as the guy he sold an acoustic guitar to on Craigslist. Swan tried to deny it, but the boy remembered he was in an army uniform at the time. Knowing the deal was about to fall apart, Reacher took out most of them, leaving the boy alive. As others rushed in, Swan got shot in the collarbone while trying to protect Reacher from a bullet. Reacher told one of his team members to call an ambulance. While waiting, he told Swan he owed him his life. In the present, Reacher gets picked up by government agents Seaver and Hart. They tell him that Senator Malcolm Lavoie has a job for him. Reacher agrees to listen and heads to the Smithsonian National Zoological Park, where they meet Lavoie backstage in the primate exhibit. Lavoie, who also appointed himself to the zoo's board, reintroduces Daniel Boyd to Reacher. Lavoie quickly figures out that Reacher and O'Donnell aren't FBI agents because he used facial recognition software to track them. Boyd sarcastically lists Reacher's military background, annoying Lavoie. Boyd talks about the incident in Margrave, Georgia, where a rookie cop and an out-of-town vet brought down a counterfeiting operation, which was the official story. Lavoie knows Reacher was involved and asks him to help with this case. Reacher brings up the potential danger to military and civilian aircraft due to Little Wing, and Lavoie thinks terrorists are after the technology. Reacher suggests that if exposed, Lavoie would be caught up in shady dealings and could be indicted. Lavoie defends himself, saying he only approves of actions to protect the nation, but Reacher points out that it also fills his pockets, and Lavoie doesn't deny it. The senator offers to help take down New Age and Little Wing, leaving no one alive to target Reacher and his team. Lavoie leaves, and Reacher starts thinking. O'Donnell calls Reacher to let him know that Calvin Franz's funeral is tomorrow in New York since the coroner released his body. Meanwhile, AM argues with Shane Langston about a price adjustment since his men barely got away with the missiles. Langston reassures AM that his old associates are causing problems, but everything will be taken care of. AM confirms he'll stick to the deal if Langston handles everything as promised. AM says he's in French Lick, Indiana. Langston tells him that the chips will be ready to install in the missiles by the time he arrives, and Swan's associates will be dealt with. At Franz's funeral, Neagley, Dixon, Reacher, and O'Donnell find out that the truck they thought had missiles was actually switched with a trailer full of bricks. They realize the plan is to send a decoy to the Los Angeles port, where it will be shipped to South Korea, taking weeks to discover. Dixon mentions that the truck was found in a field outside Denver, and it was probably loaded onto a private plane and sent to New York, where the skies are closely watched. They spot Gaetano Russo, who expresses his condolences to Mikey and Angela Franz. Russo hands Mikey a toy and a St. Jerome card, saying it's a comfort token. Before leaving, Russo asks Angela to call him if anything comes up. Reacher confronts Russo, accusing him of manipulating Franz's family and being a dirty cop. Russo, angry, says he relates to Mikey's situation because his own father, a cop, was killed on the job. He warns Reacher not to accuse him again. Russo reveals that all the personnel, except for Swan, are former NYPD officers, and Langston and a few others were investigated by Internal Affairs before their charges were dropped, allowing them to retire early. Later, Reacher realizes that the security roster is filled with dirty cops, except for Swan. Russo adds that he couldn't interview any of them because their homes are empty, just like Swan's. He tells Reacher to consider the possibility. As the funeral procession begins, Reacher spots two snipers from afar and warns the attendees. Russo guides Mikey and Angela to safety, and Neagley evacuates the crowd. Reacher and his team plan to take out or capture the snipers before the cops arrive. Reacher draws their fire, giving Neagley the chance to kill one of the snipers. The remaining sniper tries to run, and Reacher chases him but loses him. Russo arrives with his car and urges Reacher to get inside. Inside the car, Reacher suggests there's a mole in Russo's department after seeing how he's been protecting the Franz family. They continue the chase, and Reacher criticizes Russo for playing it safe. Reacher helps by accelerating and wrecking the pursuing car. After jumping out of their car, Reacher interrogates the driver and learns they were supposed to be taken out at the same time as the salute shot during the funeral. The sniper reveals they were supposed to meet their hirer in an abandoned building in Queens, and that hirer is Swan, shocking Reacher. Later, Russo secures the exits around the building while Dixon and O'Donnell take positions. Reacher and Neagley tell the sniper to get paid and spill the details inside, promising he'll walk away with the money. Reacher implants a listening device in the sniper's phone and warns him that if he messes with their plan, they'll kill him. Neagley suggests that Swan might have seen an opportunity to make money and tried to involve Franz in the operation. Reacher reveals he plans to interrogate Swan brutally for information, but Neagley doesn't press him about what will happen afterward. The sniper enters the building but dies in an explosion, leaving them all in shock. After the explosion, the NYPD rushes to the scene while Dixon, Neagley, Reacher, and O'Donnell meet at a nearby playground to discuss who or what set off the blast. O'Donnell suspects Swan was behind it all, but Reacher argues that Swan wasn't corrupt. Russo shows up and tells them the building was rigged with bombs and only the sniper's body was found. No sign of Swan. He believes the explosion was set up by someone with military experience and that Swan's plan was to have them killed in the building while taking out the sniper at the playground. Soon, Russo learns that Marlo Burns' car was found abandoned north of Manhattan near Cortlandt and shares the news. He excuses himself to confront his superior, urging them not to leave a trail of bodies behind. O'Donnell jokes, comparing Russo to a stereotypical angry movie detective. The group finds Marlo's car abandoned near a convenience store. Inside the store, they ask an employee to check the CCTV footage when Marlo and her daughter Jane came by. Neagley spots Jane carrying a Nintendo Switch and figures out they can track their location through Jane's gamertag and IP address. Neagley suggests heading to Marlo's house to track them down through the smart TV. Before they leave, Reacher buys some casual clothes and grabs a Clark bar. In Pennsylvania, Officer Hicks inspects AM's car and notices an air freshener hanging illegally from the rearview mirror. AM tries to charm his way out of the situation, but Hicks insists on writing a warning and running his license. After Hicks finishes his report, AM kills her. Dispatchers soon respond to a radio call about a homicide in Colorado. Back at Marlo's place, Neagley checks Jane's list of games and sees she has a lot of cross-platform games. Neagley logs into her own account and warns it might take a while. Reacher is surprised by how people play these games. Neagley says he'd be good at first-person shooters, and Reacher replies, "I am a first-person shooter." He then decides to sleep, with Dixon joining him later. Dixon hugs Reacher, saying she needs to release some pent-up tension from recent attacks. Meanwhile, Russo confronts Drew Marsh at his house over corruption and taking a bribe from New Age Technologies. Marsh had been the only one who knew about Reacher and his team's location when they were attacked by a biker gang in Boston. Marsh tries to intimidate Russo with his rank and plays on their old memories. But after Russo shows him the evidence, Marsh defends himself, claiming it was a smart move, as Langston had offered him money when Russo was handling Franz's murder. Marsh asks where the investigation is going, but Russo condemns him for helping terrorists and ruining the reputation of the police force. Marsh defends his actions, claiming the missiles will be used elsewhere, but Russo accuses him of working with crooked cops. Marsh argues that he had to take the bribe for self-preservation, knowing Russo's father had been a victim of corrupt cops. He pleads with Russo to take the money, but Russo questions what he'd do if terrorists use the weapons in the U.S. Russo scolds Marsh for his cowardice, reminding him that he doesn't understand Russo or his father. Back at the Burns home, Dixon and Reacher talk about Operation Kite Runner, which Hortense Fields shut down to protect her career. Reacher is upset but acknowledges the order. In the present, Reacher worries about the mission ending badly, just like the last case. He acknowledges that Swan is part of the issue and that Dixon should kill him. Neagley informs them she's tracked Jane's IP address to a location an hour away from them. Marlo and Jane are staying with her friend Chad. Marlo feels guilty for relying on him, but Chad reassures her. When Chad notices the sprinklers are on, he goes to check, only to be caught by Reacher and taken to the garage. Dixon reveals that Marlo's story about running from her ex-boyfriend was just an excuse to take shelter, but Chad doesn't believe them. Reacher demands that he call Marlo to the garage, or they'll force him. Chad hesitates, but after Reacher threatens him with a silencer, he agrees. When Marlo arrives, they question her about leading them into an ambush at Seropian's house. She insists she didn't know, and that Langston instructed her to give them the address. Langston got scared after Neagley and Dixon visited New Age. Marlo says Swan was trying to stop the operation and tells them he had hired her for the security team. She reveals that Swan gave her information about Little Wing and that defective chips were sold illegally. She also says the upper management didn't know about the incident or the engineer's identity. Marlo claims Swan asked Franz, Orozco, and Sanchez to help him investigate. After Swan's disappearance, Langston bribed her into covering up Swan's actions, threatening her and Jane. Marlo decided to run with Jane, fearing Langston would see her as a liability. When asked about the chips, Marlo tells them Langston's engineer must demonstrate the chip's installation in the missile. They plan to ambush Langston and his men at a meeting. Afterward, Reacher lets Chad go, advising Marlo to find a hotel for shelter. At New Age, Langston talks to engineer Russell Johnson about a meeting with a buyer who wants to see the chip's installation and activation. Russell assures him it will be quick. Marlo then calls Langston, telling him they're on the run from Reacher and his team. But Langston reassures her that he'll protect her if she keeps following his orders and arranges a meeting. At Russo's house, they bring Jane to him for protection. Reacher tells him about their ambush plan, and Russo mentions his meeting with Marsh and how he rejected the bribe. He assures them that Marsh won't harm him since they go way back. Russo plans to take Jane to his cousin's house on Staten Island, but Before leaving, Reacher promises that if they fight, he'll let Russo have the first punch, but Russo says he doesn't need advantages. Neagley and Reacher watch as Marlowe hugs Jane, determined to make their plan work. Later, Marlowe meets Langston in an abandoned parking lot, but he proceeds cautiously. O'Donnell and Dixon are positioned on a double-decker bus while Neagley and Reacher flank them. Reacher gives Marlowe a phone and tells her to run when he says so. Meanwhile, Russo prepares to take Jane, but Langston's men follow them, and a high-speed chase ensues. Russo calls Reacher for help, and Marlowe overhears the call, fearing for Jane's safety. Langston realizes it's a setup and rushes to kill Marlowe, but Reacher and his team intercept. The others are ordered to help while Reacher confronts Langston. Neagley directs Russo to meet in Queens while Reacher traps Langston's car by deflating its tires. Russo struggles to shake off the car chasing him and decides to stop and fire back, telling Jane to stay in the car. Meanwhile, Reacher takes down all of Langston's men and tracks down Langston by redialing his phone. He's about to kill Langston when a helicopter intercepts him. Russo realizes he's cornered, and help won't arrive in time. He tells Jane to run while he provides cover fire. Jane hesitates, but agrees. Russo is critically wounded, but manages to take out 2 of Langston's men before he succumbs to his injuries. The last of Langston's men, Grant, corners Jane and prepares to kill her, but Neagley runs him over with her car. Noticing Russo is hurt, Neagley rushes to his side and tells O'Donnell to call an ambulance. Breaking her rule of no contact, Neagley holds Russo's hand and tells him Jane is safe. Although the sound of an ambulance can be heard in the distance, Russo dies in Neagley's arms. After the shootout, the team heads back to Jade Motel. Neagley suggests hiding the Burns at Roscoe Conklin's house in Margrave, but Reacher disagrees, saying that Malcolm Lavoie already knew about their involvement in the counterfeiting operation 2 years ago. Reacher worries Shane Langston might find them there too, and doesn't want to put Roscoe or anyone else in Margrave at risk. Instead, Reacher suggests they hide the Burns somewhere far off the grid. Dixon then shares that after leaving the military, she worked in Buffalo at a debt collection agency for 6 months and rented a private place that can only be contacted via her cell. She trusts her friend Bob Lee, a former firefighter and landlord who helped her through a tough time. She knows Lee will help them. Reacher, calm as ever, assures them it'll all be over soon. Just a few more to take care of. O'Donnell comes in, handing out energy bars, and Reacher lays out the plan. O'Donnell and Dixon will escort the Burns safely while he and Neagley take care of Drew Marsh, the guy who accidentally caused Russo's death. Later, Reacher and Neagley arrive at Marsh's place. Reacher tells Neagley to stay ready while he goes in. Marsh is hurriedly packing his stuff and grabbing the cash, looking like he's about to run. When Reacher makes his presence known, Marsh eyes his gun, but Reacher was expecting that. Reacher asks Marsh if his money is worth more than the life of an honest cop. Marsh denies knowing anything about Russo's death, claiming he was only trying to take the money, citing their shared history. Reacher says that history is the only reason he didn't kill Marsh himself, and that cowards like him are too scared to get their hands dirty. Reacher gives Marsh 2 choices: talk and turn himself in, or try to make it a gunfight. Marsh goes for the second option, but Reacher pins him to the wall. Reacher demands to know when and where the Little Wing missiles and chips are being sold to terrorists, but Marsh stays silent, though he mentions Grant, the guy Neagley ran over, might have the info. Marsh tells Reacher that Grant didn't die. He's in intensive care at Mount Sinai. Reacher, frustrated, shoots Marsh in the head and takes the cash to pay Neagley for her help. Back at Jade East Motel, O'Donnell and Dixon get the Burns ready to leave for Buffalo, giving them caps for disguise. O'Donnell tells Jane that everything will be fine and shares how he teaches his sons to wear hats. After the Burns leave, Dixon notices O'Donnell's protective side and urges him to drop the case since it's too dangerous for him. But O'Donnell won't back down. Later, back in the unit's days, Reacher informs them about a heroin deal set for that evening. Dixon reminds them they've been ordered not to go after it, but Reacher argues it's the culmination of 2 years of hard work. He knows disobeying orders could ruin their careers, but he believes shutting down this deal is worth it. Surprisingly, everyone agrees to go ahead with it. That night, Reacher's team arrives at the drug deal location, only to be intercepted by Lieutenant Hughes and his team. Reacher tells them to surrender, and Neagley and Lowry are tasked with keeping the soldiers under control while the rest search for narcotics. After a frustrating search, Reacher notices something odd about the tires and, using a switchblade, uncovers heroin hidden inside. Just as they're about to arrest the soldiers, drug dealers rush in and the soldiers scatter. Neagley kills 1 soldier in a gunfight, and the rest of the team takes out the remaining threat. Hughes tries to escape, but Reacher runs him down and breaks his leg before arresting him. The next day, the unit celebrates, but Fields comes in, furious, telling them the unit is disbanded because the colonel blamed him for costing a promotion. Reacher refuses to apologize for what they did, and after Fields leaves, The team resumes celebrating. In the present, Reacher and Neagley visit Grant at the hospital, disguised as nurses. When Grant realizes who they are, Reacher threatens him into spilling information about the deal. Grant refuses at first, but after Reacher tortures him, he reveals the meeting is set for 5 a.m. the next day, though he doesn't know the location. Reacher then decides to end Grant's life by injecting air into his veins, killing him in revenge for Russo. As they leave, they run into one of Langston's assassins posing as a nurse. The assassin tries to flee, but Neagley and Reacher corner him. After a fight, Reacher kills him with a bone saw. Frustrated that they won't be able to interrogate him, Neagley grabs the assassin's phone and Reacher calls Langston. In the parking lot, Reacher informs Langston that his assassin is dead, but learns Langston has captured O'Donnell and Dixon. Langston demands that Reacher and Neagley come to a facility in Rockland County to negotiate. Reacher decides to fake Neagley's death to buy them time, telling Langston that she's dead, but that he killed her assassin. Langston warns Reacher not to alert the authorities and demands proof of life for O'Donnell and Dixon. After the call, Reacher asks Senator Lavoie for help, and Lavoie agrees to provide security. At the R&D facility, Reacher and Neagley observe the tight security. After a bit of a delay, Reacher comes up with a plan to execute it from the inside. Meanwhile, O'Donnell and Dixon are being tortured by Parker and Lennox, with O'Donnell pointing out the hypocrisy in Lennox's actions. Reacher prepares to execute his plan but is worried about the unit's future. Neagley shares her fear that this mission could be their last. Reacher reassures her, but he knows the stakes are high. After their conversation, Reacher walks into the facility, but when Langston greets him, Dixon is shocked to see him alive, and the tension builds. Reacher gets brought to the facility, and Langston starts thinking about killing him. But when Langston finds out Neagley isn't in the morgue, he orders Reacher to get on the gurney. Reacher refuses, which leads to a fight between him and Langston's guys. Langston holds Reacher at gunpoint, demanding to know where Neagley is. Reacher taunts him, saying he won't kill him until Neagley is found, because she's the last loose end. Langston gets mad, shoots O'Donnell in the leg, and orders Parker to remove the bullet to cover up the evidence. Langston then tells Reacher to sit down and starts interrogating him. Outside, Neagley is scouting the perimeter of the facility. She takes out the guards, which lets Seaver, Hart, and Beckett sneak in. Meanwhile, inside, Langston punches Reacher, trying to get Neagley's location out of him. He explains that his original plan was to steal the money and retire quietly, but Swan messed that up after discovering the chips were stolen and getting help from Franz, Orozco, and Sanchez. When Swan refused to join in, Langston framed him for the whole thing. Reacher doesn't give up any info and demands to know where Swan is. Langston shows him Swan's eyeball, revealing that he had taken Swan's fingers and eye to get past New Age's security before disposing of his body. Langston leaves and orders Parker and Lennox to load O'Donnell and Dixon onto the chopper. Neagley notices Lavoie's security arriving and sees O'Donnell and Dixon being loaded onto the chopper. Langston threatens to torture Neagley's father to get her location. He orders his guys to dispose of Swan's eye and takes some hardware from New Age's server. While this is happening, Reacher uses a pin to unlock his cuffs. At the same time, loud music blasts outside, and Pierce is told to get rid of the kids to avoid any witnesses. He goes outside and demands the music stop, but Neagley shoots him in the throat. On the roof, Seaver tries to break in while Hart cuts the facility's power. When they succeed, Reacher gets his cuffs off, and Lavoie's security starts taking out Langston's men. As the shootout rages on, Lennox and another guard are by the chopper but get killed by Neagley, who joins Reacher inside the warehouse. Langston and Parker retreat to the chopper to meet the buyer and leave the country. Reacher spots them leaving and tells Neagley to cover him as he runs and grabs onto the chopper's landing gear. Outside, Neagley and the others watch the helicopter take off. On the chopper, Langston orders Parker to throw Dixon out, but Reacher climbs in and tackles them with O'Donnell's help. The fight causes Dixon to almost fall out, but Reacher grabs her gurney, leaving him vulnerable to Langston and Parker's attacks. Parker threatens to smash Reacher's skull with O'Donnell's brass knuckles or throw Reacher out with Dixon. Reacher blocks his hits, giving Dixon a chance to break free and stab Parker in the neck with a knife that was still in Reacher. Langston is stunned and pleads for his life, offering to tell Reacher who the buyer is and where the meeting is. But Reacher throws Langston out of the helicopter, avenging his friends. Dixon frees O'Donnell and forces the pilot to take them to the meeting. Later, they arrive at Russell Johnson's house and take Russell and the pilot captive in the barn. Soon, AM and Oleg show up, but Neagley shoots Oleg in the head. Reacher takes AM for questioning, and they present the missile, accusing him of killing their friends over the weapons. AM denies it, but Reacher knows he doesn't care about innocent lives. AM offers to be arrested but insists he has a top lawyer. Dixon asks him to reveal the buyer's identity, but AM refuses, not wanting to ruin his reputation. He tries to charm his way out by claiming he's just a middleman and prefers selling weapons to holding them, but that costs him his life. When Dixon, Neagley, O'Donnell, and Reacher shoot him multiple times. After killing AM, the team recovers the bonds and the missile, then heads to the barn to meet Seaver, Hart, and Beckett. They discuss what to do with the pilot and Russell. The pilot insists he didn't kill anyone and only flew the chopper, while Russell claims he didn't know the chips were going to be used for anything bad. The team decides to let them go, and the two run towards the helicopter. As it flies over the Hudson River, Neagley fires the missile, bringing down the chopper and killing Russell and the pilot. After confirming the missile works, Seaver, Hart, and Beckett turn on them, as Lavoie had ordered them to cover up the incident. Reacher anticipated their betrayal, having figured out that Lavoie is a corrupt official who covers up his messes. He'd already called Omar Karim from the DHS, and soon enough, Karim and his team arrest Seaver, Hart, and Beckett. Reacher calls Lavoie to tell him the situation is handled, only for Omar to order Lavoie's arrest. Before leaving, Omar asks about the money, and Reacher acts clueless, then walks away with his team. They stop at a diner, where Dixon suggests they give the money to the victims' families, and asks Reacher to decide how to distribute it. Meanwhile, the news reports the helicopter crash as a system malfunction and pilot error, a cover-up by Omar. Reacher decides to split the money between Angela Franz, Anthony Russo, Gaetano Russo's brother, Orozco's sister, and Sanchez's girlfriend, Milena. He also donates part of it to an animal shelter in Swan's dog Maisie's name, and arranges for Mr. Neagley to get round-the-clock care. That night, the team spends time at Rockaway Beach. Neagley finds out about her father's condition and thanks Reacher. When O'Donnell asks about his cut, Reacher tells him there's nothing for him, but his kids are taken care of in a credit union for their education. Reacher tells O'Donnell he's free to take any job he wants, leaving him speechless. Reacher also starts a Delaware LLC under Dixon's name, encouraging her to work for herself, which she appreciates. When O'Donnell asks what Reacher will treat himself to, Reacher casually says he'll buy a new toothbrush. The team celebrates their last night together with a photo. Later, Dixon and Reacher are at a motel, where she gives him a toothbrush and jokingly invites him to meet her parents. Reacher is confused, but agrees. She's sharing a ride with O'Donnell to the airport, and they spend their last morning together. At the airport, O'Donnell and Dixon head home. Outside, Neagley notices Reacher bought a Trailways pass, good for travel anywhere in the country for a year. She also admits she's not comfortable with no contact and gives him everyone's phone numbers, asking him to stay in touch. She also knows Reacher thinks of the team as family, and he silently acknowledges it before boarding the bus. As they part ways, an old man on the bus asks Reacher where he's headed and he has no answers.